What if the rising waters swallowing our cities are not just a sign of nature's fury? What if the disasters we call natural are in reality the results of human missteps? And what if the very survival of urban life in the 21st century depends less on the oceans and rivers than on the decisions we make every day? Around the world, the story of water rising in cities is becoming alarmingly familiar. Streets once bustling with commuters now resemble canals. Subways transform into torrents during storms. Homes, businesses, and entire neighborhoods are submerged after heavy rainfall or storm surges. The question that arises is both haunting and necessary. Are these floods acts of nature, beyond human control, or are they amplified, sometimes even created, by human negligence, poor planning, and short-term thinking? The truth is complicated, because both forces are at play. On one hand, nature is undeniably changing. Climate change, driven by greenhouse gas emissions, is warming the planet. Warmer air holds more moisture, fueling heavier rainfall events. Warmer oceans feed more intense storms, driving storm surges farther inland. Sea levels, creeping higher each year, magnify the damage from even ordinary tides. In this sense, the physical environment is undeniably shifting, and rising waters are one of the most visible signs of that shift. But there is another side to the story: human error. Cities are not passive victims of climate change. They are, in many ways, architects of their own vulnerability. Consider the way urban areas have been built. Wetlands, nature's flood defenses, have been drained to make way for housing and shopping malls. Rivers have been straightened, walled off, and forced into unnatural channels, eliminating the natural floodplains that once absorbed excess water. Stormwater systems designed for the rainfall of the past are hopelessly inadequate for the downpours of the present. Concrete and asphalt, which cover vast expanses of modern cities, prevent water from soaking into the ground, turning even modest rainstorms into urban floods. In New Orleans, the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina exposed this dual reality. Yes, the storm itself was powerful, intensified by warm Gulf waters. But the devastation was magnified by levee failures, human-made defenses that were underfunded, poorly maintained, and fatally flawed. In Houston, Hurricane Harvey dumped unprecedented rainfall in 2017. But it was decades of unchecked suburban sprawl built over wetlands and prairies that left the city unable to absorb the deluge. In Jakarta, one of the fastest sinking cities in the world, flooding is worsened not only by sea level rise, but by rampant groundwater extraction that causes the land itself to sink. These examples reveal that nature provides the water, but human decisions often determine how catastrophic its impact will be. At the core of the issue lies a mindset that prioritizes short-term growth over long-term resilience. Cities compete for development, building ever closer to coasts, rivers, and low-lying areas. Real estate markets reward proximity to water with high property values, even as the risks mount. Politicians focused on election cycles often choose visible projects like new highways over invisible ones like drainage upgrades. Residents, too, play a role, demanding larger homes, paved driveways, and ever-expanding suburbs that strain fragile ecosystems. The collective result is a landscape where water has nowhere to go but into our streets and basements. This is not to say that cities are powerless. In fact, some are leading the way in showing how resilience can be built. Rotterdam in the Netherlands has pioneered water plazas, public spaces that double as reservoirs during heavy rains. Singapore has integrated natural drainage with green infrastructure, creating a system that slows and absorbs stormwater. Copenhagen is redesigning entire districts to channel floodwaters safely away from homes and businesses. These examples demonstrate that human choices can mitigate rather than magnify the risks of rising waters. The challenge is scale and urgency. The pace of climate change is accelerating, but the pace of urban adaptation is uneven and slow. For every city investing in green infrastructure, many more are still doubling down on outdated defenses like seawalls, which may protect one area while shifting risk to another. For every neighborhood designed to live with water, countless others are built on floodplains with little more than wishful thinking as protection. This tension between nature and human error plays out most dramatically in megacities. New York learned hard lessons from Hurricane Sandy in 2012, when storm surges flooded subways and knocked out power to millions. Plans for coastal defences have since been proposed, but implementation remains fragmented and delayed. In Manila, frequent floods paralyze transportation and displace residents, exacerbated by poor waste management that clogs drainage systems. In Dhaka, unregulated construction has choked waterways, leaving millions at the mercy of even moderate rains. Each case reflects a blend of natural forces and human failures, intertwined in ways that make it difficult to assign blame cleanly to one or the other. Yet perhaps the most dangerous myth is the belief that floods are purely natural disasters beyond our control. This narrative absolves human systems of responsibility and discourages proactive measures. It allows governments to frame disasters as acts of fate, rather than failures of planning or governance. It allows individuals to rationalize risky decisions, like buying homes in flood zones, as unavoidable gambles. It masks the reality that much of the suffering caused by rising waters could be prevented with better foresight, stronger policies, and a willingness to prioritize resilience over convenience. The human cost of this failure is staggering. Families lose homes not once, but multiple times, trapped in cycles of rebuilding and reflooding. Insurance systems collapse under the weight of repeated claims, leaving homeowners unprotected. Local economies falter as businesses shutter and property values plummet. Vulnerable populations, often the poor and marginalized, suffer the most, lacking the resources to relocate or recover. These are not random tragedies. They are the predictable outcomes of a society that has underestimated both the power of water and the consequences of its own choices. At the same time, the natural world is sending unmistakable warnings. Glaciers melt, seas rise, storms intensify. These are not phenomena that cities can negotiate with or ignore. Nature will continue to act according to its own laws, and human societies must adapt accordingly. The choice is not whether water will rise, it already is. The choice is how prepared we will be when it does. So is the flooding of cities the fault of nature or of humanity? The honest answer is both, but the weight of responsibility leans heavily toward us. Nature provides the challenge, but human decisions amplify the risk. To frame the issue as one of pure natural disaster is to deny the role we play in shaping outcomes. To acknowledge our part is not to accept blame passively, but to recognize the power we have to change course. The story of rising waters in cities is ultimately a story of accountability. Accountability for emissions that drive climate change. Accountability for urban planning that ignores risk. Accountability for political choices that prioritize short-term gains over long-term survival. But it is also a story of possibility. If cities can acknowledge their role in creating the problem, they can also become leaders in creating solutions. This is not an abstract debate for academics or policymakers alone. It is a question that affects every urban resident who relies on safe streets, reliable infrastructure, and stable property values. It is a question that determines whether the next generation will inherit thriving cities or sinking ones. And it is a question that forces us to look beyond the headlines of record floods to the deeper forces shaping them. The rising waters are real, and they are coming faster than we think. The choice before us is stark. Continue to build cities that fight nature and lose, or reimagine cities that work with nature and endure. The future of urban life, and perhaps the future of human civilization, will be decided in that choice. When examining the phenomenon of rising waters in cities, one cannot avoid the complex interplay of human behavior, urban development, and environmental transformation. Part 1 raised the fundamental question of whether floods are the fault of nature or the result of human mistakes. In reality, the story only begins with that dichotomy. To truly grasp the scope of the crisis, we need to understand how centuries of urban planning decisions, political priorities, and economic incentives have made cities vulnerable, and why climate change is now amplifying those vulnerabilities into existential threats. For most of human history, cities have grown near water. Rivers provided transportation, fertile soil, and trade. Coastal areas gave access to global commerce and abundant fisheries. These advantages shaped the geography of modern civilization. But what once made sense as a lifeline has, in today's climate reality, become a liability. Cities built beside rivers or seas now find themselves on the front lines of rising tides and intensifying storms. The very geography that once supported prosperity is exposing millions of people to risk. What makes the issue more troubling is how urbanization has reconfigured the natural balance of water. In a pre-industrial landscape, rainfall absorbed into soils, wetlands, and forests before gradually flowing into rivers. In modern cities, impervious surfaces like asphalt and concrete prevent infiltration. Rain runs off rapidly, overwhelming drainage systems, inundating streets and triggering flash floods. Instead of working with natural hydrological cycles, cities have reshaped them into systems primed for disaster. This transformation is not an accident of nature, it is a human-made problem. The role of infrastructure cannot be overstated. Many cities depend on drainage systems built decades, even a century ago, designed for rainfall patterns that no longer apply. In places like New York, storm drains buckle under intense cloudbursts, turning subway stations into waterfalls. In London, Victorian-era sewers groan under volumes they were never built to handle. In Mumbai, monsoon rains repeatedly paralyze the city, exacerbated by blocked drains and unchecked construction. These failures are not the fault of storms alone, but of outdated systems left to languish while populations and risks grew. The failures of governance deepen the problem. Too often, city leaders prioritize growth over resilience. Developers lobby for waterfront projects, lured by high returns, while officials approve permits without adequately weighing risk. In some countries, corruption fuels illegal construction on floodplains or the filling of wetlands, removing critical buffers against rising waters. Policies that should restrict risky development are watered down, and enforcement is lax. The result is a cycle where cities knowingly add to their vulnerability, even as climate science warns of worsening threats. The economic forces at work add another dimension. Real estate markets reward proximity to water with higher property values. People desire ocean views, riverside living, and lakefront recreation. This demand drives developers to build in flood-prone areas, often masking risks from buyers with assurances of safety or inadequate disclosure. The profits from short-term sales outweigh the long-term risks, leaving homeowners to bear the consequences when waters inevitably rise. Entire financial ecosystems, from mortgages to insurance, are entangled in this risky calculus, compounding systemic exposure. At the same time, inequality defines the geography of vulnerability. Wealthier residents can afford to build elevated homes, buy insurance, or relocate altogether. Poorer communities often live in the lowest, most flood-prone areas, lacking resources to adapt or escape. When disaster strikes, they suffer disproportionately. After Hurricane Katrina, it was the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans, many of them historically marginalized, that bore the brunt of flooding. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, slum dwellers live along canals and rivers where flooding is frequent, while wealthier neighborhoods have protective infrastructure. Rising waters reveal not only the fragility of cities, but also the injustices embedded within them. Yet even as these vulnerabilities grow clearer, the myth of natural disaster persists. Politicians, when confronted with floods, often describe them as acts of God, as though they were unavoidable. This framing diverts attention from human responsibility and absolves institutions of accountability. It fosters passivity among the public, who see themselves as powerless victims of nature, rather than participants in systems that can be changed. Breaking this myth is essential, because only by recognizing human agency can we begin to address the problem. The climate dimension, of course, is undeniable. Global warming amplifies natural processes in ways cities cannot ignore. Sea levels are projected to rise by several feet this century, threatening coastal megacities like Miami, Shanghai, and Lagos. Warmer oceans supercharge hurricanes and typhoons, making storm surges deadlier. Shifting rainfall patterns bring torrential downpours to regions unaccustomed to them. These forces are beyond the control of any single city or nation. But how cities respond, whether they adapt with foresight or collapse in denial, remains firmly within human hands. Some cities are making strides in adaptation. Tokyo, for example, has invested billions in underground flood tunnels, vast caverns designed to divert and store floodwaters during extreme rainfall. Singapore's ABC Waters program integrates green infrastructure into urban design, creating spaces that absorb and slow water while doubling as public amenities. Rotterdam has become a global leader in water resilience, turning its historic struggle against the sea into a blueprint for coexistence rather than domination. These examples show what is possible when human ingenuity aligns with environmental reality. Still, these success stories are exceptions rather than the norm. In many developing countries, resources for such massive projects are scarce, and governance challenges make long-term planning difficult. Even in wealthy nations, political will often falters. Infrastructure upgrades are costly, disruptive, and less glamorous than other projects. Climate adaptation rarely wins votes, and so it is postponed until the next disaster makes it unavoidable. By then, the cost in lives and property is exponentially greater. The cultural and psychological aspects of rising waters also deserve attention. Humans have long viewed themselves as separate from nature, bending rivers, draining marshes, and taming coasts to suit their needs. This mindset has created cities that resist, rather than accommodate, water. Yet in cultures where water is seen as a partner rather than an enemy, different solutions emerge. In the Netherlands, the philosophy of living with water guides urban design, accepting flooding as inevitable but making it manageable. In contrast, many cities still cling to the illusion that walls and barriers can hold back the tide indefinitely. When those defenses fail, the shock is devastating. The stakes are not only physical, but existential. As waters rise, cities must decide what they value most. Will they protect wealthy districts at the expense of poorer ones? Will they invest in resilience for the long term, or cling to short-term profits from risky development? Will they embrace managed retreat, relocating people from unsustainable areas, or will they pour resources into delaying the inevitable? These decisions reveal not just engineering priorities, but moral choices about justice, equity, and survival. The reality is stark. Some cities may not survive in their current form. Jakarta, sinking under its own weight and battered by floods, is already planning to move its capital inland. Small island nations face the prospect of abandoning entire towns to the sea. Coastal US communities, from Louisiana bayous to Alaskan villages, are relocating piece by piece. These are not abstract possibilities, but living examples of what happens when nature's power collides with human choices. But surrender is not the only path. By acknowledging both the natural forces at play and the human role in amplifying them, cities can chart new strategies. Green infrastructure, adaptive planning, and honest communication with residents can shift the trajectory. Crucially, it requires reimagining the relationship between cities and water, not as enemies locked in endless conflict, but as neighbors forced to coexist. That mindset change may be the most difficult of all, but it is also the most necessary. Rising waters in cities are neither entirely nature's fault, nor solely human error. They are the product of a collision between a warming planet and a civilization that has underestimated the risks of its own expansion. The floods that submerge subways, paralyze transportation, and devastate neighborhoods are the visible symptoms of deeper failures. They remind us that survival in the age of climate change depends not only on engineering and technology, but on humility, foresight, and the courage to act before it is too late. The waters will keep rising. That is certain. What remains uncertain is how humanity will respond, whether with denial, delay, and disaster, or with innovation, justice, and resilience. The cities of the future are being shaped now, in the decisions we make about where we live, how we build, and how we adapt. The outcome will determine whether the story of rising waters is one of tragedy or of survival. Every time a city drowns beneath the weight of rising water, the same haunting question echoes. Is this the price of living on a warming planet, or is it the direct result of human negligence? By the time the streets are rivers, the basements are ruined, and the power grids are silent, the distinction seems meaningless to those suffering in the floodwaters. Yet, for the survival of our cities and the billions who inhabit them, this question matters profoundly. It determines whether we act with foresight or continue repeating the same mistakes until nature forces us to surrender. To grasp the scale of the challenge, we must confront the uncomfortable truth that rising waters are not anomalies, they are becoming the new normal. Climate change accelerates the process, but human actions compound it. Poorly planned cities, weak infrastructure, and relentless expansion into vulnerable areas amplify every storm surge and every torrential downpour. In many cases, the destruction we attribute to nature is less about the rain that fell and more about the choices we made before it did. Look at Miami, where glistening condos rise only feet above sea level. Developers and buyers alike are chasing profits and lifestyles along coastlines that scientists warn will flood more frequently in the coming decades. Tidal flooding, or sunny day flooding, already interrupts daily life, with saltwater bubbling up through storm drains even in the absence of storms. Yet construction continues, mortgages are written, and properties are bought as if tomorrow's risks did not exist. This is not the wrath of nature alone, it is a gamble, and one stacked against the future. Consider Jakarta, a megacity of over 30 million people, literally sinking under its own weight. The city floods with terrifying regularity, worsened by both sea level rise and the extraction of groundwater that causes the land itself to collapse. Engineers can point to natural causes, but the truth is plain. Decades of unregulated development and unsustainable water use have accelerated Jakarta's descent. The decision to move Indonesia's capital inland is a testament to the scale of human-created vulnerability. New York City offers another perspective. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy unleashed a storm surge that overwhelmed defenses and plunged large parts of the city into darkness. The destruction was natural in its force, but deeply human in its impact. Subways, power grids, and hospitals were never designed with such floods in mind. The city has since proposed multi-billion-dollar seawalls and protective systems, but progress is slow, and critics argue that piecemeal solutions will never be enough. The lesson is clear. Waiting until disaster strikes to act ensures that the cost in lives, property, and dollars is far greater than it needs to be. The financial dimension of these floods cannot be ignored. Insurance companies are pulling back from markets they deem unprofitable, leaving homeowners exposed. Governments step in with relief, but such interventions are unsustainable in the long run. Without insurance, property values plummet. Without resilient infrastructure, businesses flee. Without adaptation, cities risk a downward spiral where confidence evaporates faster than the floodwaters recede. The collapse of local economies becomes not just a possibility, but a trajectory. Yet, even in the face of this grim reality, solutions exist. Green infrastructure offers a way forward, allowing cities to live with water instead of fighting it. Parks designed to absorb rainfall, restored wetlands that act as natural buffers, and permeable pavements that reduce runoff are just a few tools available. The Netherlands has shown the world that coexistence with water is possible, designing room for the river projects that allow controlled flooding rather than catastrophic inundation. Singapore, Tokyo, and Copenhagen are investing heavily in forward-looking adaptations. These cities prove that resilience is not only achievable, but also beneficial, creating healthier and more livable urban environments. But adaptation requires more than engineering. It requires honesty. Residents must be told the truth about risks, even when it lowers property values. Politicians must resist the temptation to downplay dangers for short-term popularity. Banks and insurers must factor climate risks into their decisions transparently, even when it disrupts markets. Only with transparency can individuals, families, and communities make informed choices about where and how they live. And then comes the hardest truth of all: some areas cannot be saved. Managed retreat, the deliberate relocation of people and assets away from high-risk zones, is one of the most politically unpopular yet unavoidable strategies of the future. Communities in Alaska, Louisiana, and the Pacific Islands are already moving. These stories may seem remote, but they are harbingers of a broader reality. The sooner societies accept this, the less devastating the transition will be. The human element cannot be overlooked. Behind every statistic about rising seas and urban flooding are families losing homes, children missing school, and livelihoods washed away. Flooding disproportionately affects the poor, who often live in the most vulnerable areas and have the least resources to recover. To ignore this injustice is to accept a future in which climate change deepens inequality and erodes social stability. Solutions must therefore be equitable, ensuring that resilience is not a privilege of the wealthy, but a right for all. We face a choice: We can continue to treat floods as natural disasters, acts of God and freak occurrences, or we can recognize them as signals, warnings that our relationship with the environment must change. If we take the second path, we have a chance not just to survive, but to thrive, building cities that embrace resilience and sustainability. If we do not, the rising waters will force change upon us at a cost far greater than any we might willingly bear. This is not a distant issue confined to faraway places. It is already unfolding in New York, Houston, Miami, New Orleans, Venice, Manila, and Dhaka. The question is not whether waters will rise, it is how we will respond. Will we invest in resilience now or pay the price in devastation later? Will we choose foresight or cling to denial until it is too late? The future of cities hangs in the balance, and the choice is ours. But it requires urgency, it requires leadership, and it requires ordinary people demanding accountability and change from those who hold power. Every vote, every policy, every decision about where to build and how to live is part of this struggle. Crisis Lens exists to illuminate these realities, to bring the hidden risks into focus, and to spark the conversations that can lead to action. If you found this perspective valuable, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Crisis Lens to stay informed about the forces shaping our world. Like and share this video to spread awareness of the rising threat. And most importantly, watch the full series to see how cities across the globe are confronting, or failing to confront, the challenge of rising waters. Together, we can hold leaders accountable, support smarter planning, and prepare ourselves and our communities for what lies ahead. The waters are rising, but so too can our resolve.